inviting me for this webinar. So mainly my presentation is about the French national plans and the French policy on the energy sector and forest sector. Okay, so just I won't spend too much time on the context, which you all aware of, but we EU to be engage itself to be a climate neutral continent by 2050. And to do that, the energy use is a very important challenge because it represents more than 70% of the greenhouse gases emissions of the European Union. And as such, bioenergy is seen as something that is very interesting for the energy use and to decarbonate the energy use, and is right now the main source of renewable energy in European Union and represents 60% of bioenergy. And if you see on the figure on the right of the slide, we are currently using 20% of renewable energies, and there is a very ambitious target by 2050, which is 95% of renewable sources in European Union. And the forest sector and the forest biomass is a really important part of the bioenergy and is really appealing for public policies because of that. And we have like 60% of the EU domestic biomass that comes from wood. So it's a really important share. But the trigger is that forest is not only contributing to climate mitigation for its use in energy, but have a more general role, which is a climate mitigation through sequestration first, because you have sequestration in the forest soil and in the biomass, which represents in France around 63 million tons of dioxide carbon per year between 2010 and 2015. Then you have the storage role of forests, which is important as well, which means that you are keeping carbon in wood products even when harvested. And it represented around 2 million of tons of dioxide carbon per year between 2010 and 2015. And last, you have the substitution effect, which takes place when you use wood for energy, because you use wood instead of other energy sources that are more intensive in dioxide carbon emissions. But also when you use wood as material, for example, in construction. And this substitution effect is estimated to be of 42 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2015 in France. So overall, we have a forest sector which contributes to climate mitigation by sequestrating and avoiding 117 million tons of CO2 in 2015. But what is triggering here is that you can see that the carbon sink and the sequestration role of forest is decreasing in the past few years in France. And if you look at the European picture, if you look at the European picture, this carbon sink is decreasing in the whole Europe in the past few years. And some people advocate that wood shouldn't be used for energy purposes because it endangers this carbon sink, and that we should mainly use wood, that we should mainly first protect forests and forest area to avoid overexploitation of them, and we should use wood based on the cascade of use principle, so mainly for material substitution instead of energy one. And this is one of the three main narratives that is surrounding the use of wood for energy purposes. And this narrative that wood shouldn't be used in the renewable energy mix, except at the end of its life, is more or less the narratives that have been adopted in the Fit for 55 package, according to Cole and co-authors. And there is two other narratives. The first one is the historical one, which says that wood for energy purposes is a carbon neutral source of energy, and that forest biomass sustainability is granted whatever we do. And this narrative is kind of not very used now anymore, because we have we're really well aware of the impact of a more intensive management of forests on the potential on the carbon sink and the environment on a more general point of view. And there is a third narrative, which is to say that forest biomass can contribute to climate change mitigation, but that we need to have a holistic view to avoid any degradation of forest ecosystem and ensure the provision of other forest functions such as carbon sink, but also maintaining water quality, air quality. And what is a very interesting notion in this narrative is the notion of a carbon payback period, because you need to account for the time it takes for the forest to rebuild the carbon you have consumed by using wood for energy. And we are going to see that it's more or less the narrative that was adopted by the French legislation. But before presenting you the French legislation, I will present you a broad picture on the renewable energy and the wood biomass in the French energy mix. So basically in France, we more or less have the same share of renewable energy as in Europe, in overall Europe, because we have 20% of gross energy consumption that is accounted by renewable energies. And if you look at the share of wood energy in this renewable energy mix, it's almost 1/3 of all of the renewable energy mix in France. So it's quite an important source of renewable energy that we have to account for. And we can also see on the left figure that you have the 2030 targets for the French energy mix, and we meant to increase our renewable energy use by more than 30% by 2030. And to do so, we have what is called the multi-annual energy plan in France. So it's part of the French governance on wood energy and forest sector. And this multi-annual energy plan sets strategic priorities in terms of energy for 10 years. So the current plan is plan going from 2019 to 2028. And renewable energy is one of the main objectives, because we want to accelerate the development of renewable energy to reach the 230 targets. But it's not the only objective. You also have objective on better energy efficiency and also like clean mobility. And the scenario that is used in this multi-annual energy plan directly derived from the national low carbon strategy that was adopted in France. So this national low carbon strategy was revised in 2020 and gives the number about the final energy requirement that is to be expected in the French society based on scenarios by 2050, and also gives some indication on how much raw biomasses we need to meet this final energy requirements, and how much woody biomass we need. And to meet with this need for woody biomass by 2015, we have the National Biomass Mobilization Strategy. So this strategy is here to answer the national low carbon need for woody biomass, and it looks both at the quantitative point of view, so the volume of wood we need to have, but also at a qualitative point of view, so the quality of wood we need, because it has an impact on the energy efficiency of wood, but also it looks at the interaction with the whole forest ecosystems and try to account for the potential negative impacts of an increased biomass mobilization, both from an economic, social, and environmental point of view. And so that's really important to have this broad picture of the forest ecosystem and how increasing mobilization will affect the ecosystem and the whole forest sector. And these three plans are basically part of what is called in France the Law for Energy Transition and Green Growth that was adopted in 2015. And they are really interrelated with each other and also linked to other strategy, like, for example, on bioeconomy. But when talking about the forest sector, we cannot not talk about the National Forestry and Wood Program, because it's the program that defines the focuses of the forest policy for the 10 next years. And basically it defines the forest management strategy of the French forest, and the productive function of forest is really well assessed in this program. We acknowledge the need for an increased timber harvesting, but we also take into account the other function of forest and the other ecosystem services. For example, you can see that the second main objective that was defined on the plan for 2016-2026 is to meet the expectation of the general public. So we have a broad view on what our forests are, who use them, and what we need to account for in policy. And so this program is part of what's called the Law for Future of Agriculture, Food and Forestry. So this was the main program that involved forests, but it's not the only program. As I told you, we also have a program for bioeconomy, but I will focus on these three because it's more the four programs that have the most impact on the forest management strategy. And if you look at the strategy that was adopted by France, so you can say that the French climate governance tried to find a balance between wood for energy purposes and the forest carbon sink that help mitigate climate change overall. And what is important to see is that we do not limit the use of wood for energy to end of life products. It's a share of our wood uses, but it's not only that. We have a large share of energy use, which comes directly from wood and co-products from the wood industry. But what is important to see is that France wants to decrease the share of timber harvest that is dedicated to energy purposes, because it represented 70% in 2015. So it was the main use of timber harvest, and they wanted to represent more or less 50% in 2015. And because of this change in the structure of wood uses toward material use, you also have an evolution in the carbon sink of forests. So in 2015, the carbon sink mainly comes from the forest themselves, so it's the in situ carbon sink. And you can see that in 2050, it's expected to be much lower. If you add the previous forest with the new forest, you have like a decrease about 50% in the in situ carbon sink compared to 2015. But the French policy want to rely more on the carbon sink, which is ex situ, so the carbon which is stored in wood products, and it's expected to be multiplied by 10 between 2015 and 2050. So it's quite a large restructuration of the carbon sink that is expected to happen in the French forest sector. So basically, we can say that the approach of the French legislation on forest and energy is quite an holistic approach, and France really counts on the restructuration of the forest carbon sink to allow to find a balance between the mitigation role of forest biomass as an energy source, but also as a storage source of carbon. And so what is interesting is that the French the French low carbon strategy came first in a WWF survey on low carbon strategy, and it is recognized as a good strategy which has a good holistic point of view on the whole forest sector and on the whole economy more generally. But at the same time, there is some great concern on the scenario that is built in France. And in particular, the Institute for Climate Economics raised an alarm on the low carbon strategy in France in 2022, because they argue that the targets that are set for the forest sector particularly are really ambitious, even if not unrealistic, because they implied, so from a scenario point of view, it could be done, but they implied a massive amount of investments and a massive restructuration of the whole industry around the forest sector, and it's unlikely to happen. So these unrealistic targets, we need to assess what will be the impact on the French low carbon strategy if we cannot meet them, and what are the investments to be made, what are the policies that work or won't work. And there are other gray areas. We some presentation before mentioned that there is some uncertainties, and one great uncertainty that is not well assessed in scenarios now is comes from the international part, because we have this problem in France and in Europe more generally, which is the weight of China in the wood demand in the past few years. So it means that China demand for wood is very, very important, and it drives exportation and wood production to be exported toward China. And basically all those scenarios more or less think that the increased biomass mobilization we will have in France will stay in France, but it's unlikely to happen given the international context and the weight of China, and we have to assess that in our scenarios and in your future scenarios and policies. So yeah, I think it's all for me.